Ed Sullivan stood outside the Rolling Stones dressing room with his hand on the doorknob, listening to the conversation happening inside. It was January 15th, 1967, exactly 2 hours before showtime, and through the thin door he could hear Mick Jagger's voice, clear and defiant. "We'll tell Ed whatever he wants to hear, then we'll do whatever we want on stage. What's he going to do, stop us mid-song on live television?" Keith Richards laughed, a sound like broken glass. "The old man thinks he can control us. Let him think that. Makes it more fun when we prove him wrong." Ed's hand tightened on the doorknob. He'd suspected this might happen, had feared it. But hearing it confirmed, hearing these young men openly planning to deceive him, that made something cold and hard settle in his chest. Ed Sullivan had been lied to before, but nobody had ever been stupid enough to plan their lie where he could hear it. Ed pushed open the door. The conversation inside stopped instantly. Mick and Keith turned to look at him, and for just a moment Ed saw something flicker across their faces. Not guilt, not shame. Something closer to satisfaction. Like they'd wanted him to overhear. Like this was all part of the game. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the moment when the Rolling Stones didn't just defy Ed Sullivan. They planned their defiance, executed it on live television, and turned the destruction of their relationship with Ed into the blueprint that every rebel rock band would follow for the next 50 years. The story of what happened between Ed Sullivan and the Rolling Stones on January 15, 1967, begins 3 weeks earlier in a very different room. Ed's office at CBS headquarters. December 20th, 1966. The Rolling Stones manager sat across from Ed, and between them lay a contract that would pay the Stones $15,000 for a single appearance. It was an enormous sum in 1966, more than most bands made in an entire year. But Ed had one requirement written into that contract in language so specific that CBS lawyers had spent hours crafting it. The Rolling Stones would perform "Let's Spend the Night Together," but they would change one line. The lyric "Let's spend the night together" would become "Let's spend some time together." One word. Night to time. That was all Ed required. The sexual implication of spending the night together was obvious to everyone. In 1966, that phrase meant sex. It meant exactly what parents were terrified rock and roll was encouraging their teenage daughters to do. Ed couldn't allow that lyric on family television. Not on Sunday night. Not on the Ed Sullivan Show. The Stones manager had taken the contract back to Mick and Keith. "They want you to change night to time. That's the only condition." Mick had read the contract carefully, had seen the clause, had smiled that famous Jagger smile that never quite reached his eyes. "We'll sign it. Tell Ed we agree to his terms." Keith had been more direct. "We're lying, right? We're signing this and then doing whatever we want." Mick's response had been carefully calculated. "We're signing a contract that says we agree to change the lyric. What happens on live television is a different matter. Contracts can't control what comes out of my mouth when I'm singing." The manager had understood what Mick was planning but had signed the contract anyway, because $15,000 was $15,000, and what happened after that wasn't his problem. Now 3 weeks later, Ed Sullivan was standing in the Stones' dressing room, having overheard them planning to break the agreement they'd signed. "Gentlemen," Ed said, his voice quiet and cold, "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. You seem to be under the impression that you can sign a contract with me and then ignore it." Mick stood up slowly. "Ed, we haven't ignored anything. The show hasn't happened yet. We're just discussing possibilities." "You're discussing lying to me on live television," Ed said. "Let me be very clear about what will happen if you sing 'Let's spend the night together' instead of 'Let's spend some time together.' I will cut your audio. 60 million people will watch your mouths move with no sound. You'll look like fools, and you'll never appear on television again. Not just my show. Any show. I'll make sure of it." Keith Richards, who'd been sitting on a couch, stood up and walked toward Ed. Not threatening, but not backing down either. "Ed, you're going to cut our audio on live TV because of one word. You think that won't make you look like the fool? You think people won't figure out what happened? I think people will see that the Rolling Stones couldn't follow simple instructions, and I think your reputation as professional musicians will be destroyed." Mick stepped between Keith and Ed. "We signed your contract. Ed, we'll honor it. Night becomes time. You have our word." Ed looked at Mick, trying to read his face. trying to see if this was another lie or actual capitulation. Your word means nothing if I heard you planning to break it 10 minutes ago. You heard us discussing what would happen if we broke it, Mick said smoothly. That's not the same as planning to break it. We were just talking through scenarios. But we've decided. We'll do it your way. Ed wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, because canceling the Rolling Stones 2 hours before showtime would be a disaster. I'm holding you to that, Mick. And I'm telling you right now, if you betray me, if you sing that lyric on my stage, the consequences will be worse than anything you're imagining. Mick smiled. Ed, we understand. We'll behave. January 15, 1967, 8:37 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The Rolling Stones had already performed one song. Now they were setting up for Let's Spend the Night Together. Ed stood in the wings watching Mick at the microphone, watching Keith with his guitar, feeling his stomach twist into knots. In the control booth, Ed's director had his finger on the audio cut button, ready to mute the broadcast the instant Mick sang the forbidden lyric. Ed had given very specific instructions. If Mick says night, cut the audio immediately. Better dead air than that word reaching America's living rooms. The song started. The familiar opening riff. Keith's guitar cutting through the studio. And then Mick opened his mouth to sing the first verse, the verse with the controversial lyric. Let's spend the night together. Now I need you more than ever. He'd said it. Not time. Night, the word Ed had explicitly, contractually, absolutely forbidden. Ed's hand shot up, signaling the control booth. Cut the audio. Now. But in the control booth something had gone wrong. The director hit the button to cut the Stones' audio. But instead of muting just the performance, the entire broadcast lost sound. 60 million Americans watching at home heard nothing. Complete silence. Their televisions showed the Rolling Stones performing, Mick's mouth moving, Keith's fingers on the guitar, the drums in the background. But no sound. Just dead air. The silence lasted for 7 seconds. 7 seconds of national television with no audio. It felt like an eternity. The director frantically worked the controls, trying to restore sound to the broadcast without restoring the Stones' audio. But the system had failed. When the sound came back, it came back completely. The Stones were audible again, and Mick, realizing what had happened, smiled directly at the camera and emphasized the next "Let's spend the night together" even more clearly than the first. Ed Sullivan's face went from pale to purple. In the control booth, technicians were screaming at each other, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. How a simple audio cut had crashed the entire broadcast signal. What Ed didn't know, what wouldn't be discovered until days later, was that Keith Richards had done something before the show started. He'd gone into the control booth while the crew was at dinner, found the audio board and subtly damaged the mute function so that trying to cut their audio would create a system failure. It was deliberate sabotage, planned and executed with the precision of a military operation. When the song ended, Ed didn't walk onto the stage to thank the Rolling Stones like he did with other performers. He stood in the wings, shaking with rage, waiting for them to come off stage. Mick walked past Ed without stopping. Ed grabbed his arm. "My office now. Both of you." In Ed's office 5 minutes later, with the show still in progress and other performers waiting to go on, Ed unleashed 20 years of accumulated authority on Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. "You lied to me. You signed a contract. You gave me your word. And you went on my stage and you lied to 60 million people." Mick sat down in Ed's chair uninvited, putting his feet up on Ed's desk. The disrespect was deliberate and obvious. "Ed, we sang our song the way it was written, the way it's always been sung. You asked us to change it. We considered your request. We declined. You signed a contract." Ed's voice was rising now, control slipping. "Sue us then," Keith said from where he leaned against the wall. "Take us to court. Explain to a judge that you're suing the Rolling Stones because we sang nights instead of time. Say how that plays in the press." Ed understood the trap. They'd set this up perfectly. If he sued, he'd look like a tyrant trying to censor art over one word. If he did nothing, he looked weak, unable to control performers on his own show. "You sabotaged my control booth," Ed said, the realization hitting him. The audio failure wasn't an accident. Keith smiled. "I don't know what you're talking about, Ed. Technology fails sometimes. It's not our fault your equipment is old. Ed pointed at the door. Get out of my building. You will never appear on this show again. And I promise you by tomorrow morning every television network in America will know what you did tonight. Mick stood up, straightened his shirt and looked Ed directly in the eyes. Ed, your show is for old people. Our fans don't watch the Ed Sullivan Show. They buy our records. They come to our concerts. We didn't need you. We did you a favor by appearing. And now we're done with each other. We can both live with that. The Rolling Stones walked out of Ed Sullivan's office and out of his show forever. But the damage they'd done went deeper than Ed realized in that moment. Because the Doors had been watching. Jimi Hendrix had been watching. Every rock band that was chafing under television's restrictions had been watching. And they'd all seen the same thing. The Rolling Stones had defied Ed Sullivan on live television and survived. Had even come out stronger. The brief audio blackout had become part of the legend. People talked about it. Did you see when Ed Sullivan tried to censor the Rolling Stones and crashed his own broadcast? Within weeks, the Doors would refuse to change Higher and Light My Fire. Jimi Hendrix would make his guitar sexual in ways that made the Stones look tame. Band after band started testing Ed, pushing back, refusing to comply. All of them using the Rolling Stones playbook: agree to everything, then do what you want when the cameras are rolling. Ed Sullivan's show ended in 1971, just 4 years after the Stones incident. CBS cited changing tastes and declining ratings. But Ed knew the truth. The Rolling Stones had broken something that night. They'd shown that Ed's power was an illusion, that his threats were empty, that rock and roll didn't need television's approval anymore. In one of his final interviews before his death in 1974, Ed was asked about his biggest regret. The Rolling Stones, he said immediately. Not booking them. That was fine. The mistake was thinking I could control them. They wanted a fight. They planned the fight. They executed the fight perfectly. And I walked right into it like an amateur. The interviewer asked if Ed blamed the Stones for his show ending. Ed was quiet for a long moment. I blame them for showing every other rock band that they didn't need to respect television anymore. Once the Stones proved you could defy Ed Sullivan and survive, everyone started defying me. And a show based on respect and authority can't survive when nobody respects your authority. Mick Jagger, asked about the incident in a 2003 interview, told the story with obvious pleasure. We planned the whole thing. The contract, the agreement, overhearing our conversation. Keith thought that was too much, but I insisted. We wanted Ed to know we were going to betray him. Made it more satisfying when we actually did it. And sabotaging the audio board. That was Keith's genius. Ed trying to censor us and crashing his own show instead. That was perfect. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. The Rolling Stones didn't just break their promise to Ed Sullivan, they planned to break it, made sure he knew they were planning it, and then executed their rebellion on live television in front of 60 million people. Have you ever planned revenge so perfectly that your enemy knew it was coming but couldn't stop it? Share your story in the comments below.